World surrender. Foreign prisoner Rumian Chef, while Patton walked through a Forta camp and saw something so horrifying. In May 1945, the war in Europe was over. Hitler had surrendered. Millions celebrated Sechna in the streets, believing the nightmare had finally ended. Horrifying. The 14th World War II. Patton walked through a Dwater camp, saw something's you're seen so frissy. Freedom never came. Soldiers, or more than 9,000 Americans you're seen, camp. Freedom never came, only to be taken by the Soviet Union and locked behind a new set of barbed wire. Through our prisoner camp, and saw walk through a prisoner camp. Then came the most so horrifying. Then came the most prisoner part. When the United States demanded their return, Stalin claimed those men did not exist. But one general refused to accept that answer. His name was Patton. For end of World War II, General Patton walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying, and what he did next nearly brought two Allied superpower friends to the edge of armed confrontation. This is the story of the moment World War II ended did. Or I told you, rang the fling that Menvertsy Gaze, General Patton memes of General Patton then Major Soldiers. The American walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying and something truly begun. May 1945 should have felt like the end of suffering. Across Europe, church bells rang through shattered cities, crowds poured into the streets. According where camp, encircling and neathing where turn, General Patton facing them, enchirted and goading what we unifying. Soldiers fired rifles into the air. Soldiers, strangers embraced each other in the rubble and cried because, somehow, they had lived long enough to see the Third Reich fall. Germany had surrendered, already known. What if I to a keen camp, except Patton, walked prisoner area and saw something so horrifying? The war in Europe was over ends. But for thousands of American soldiers, far from the celebration, victory had not brought freedom. They had survived years in German prison camps. Open, near the end of through a prisoner camp, General Patton walked through a prisoner camp. They had endured starvation, beatings, disease, and winter so cold. Men slept, pressed together, just to keep from freezing to death. Horrifying. Emeden Standking. General Patton and Calkins, Nakter Kappen sauce the Rakora camp, and Soviet troops smashed through eastern Germany and liberated the camps. Then, when Soviet troops smashed through eastern Germany and liberated the camps, those Americans believed their nightmare was finally over. They were wrong. Instead of being sent west toward American lines, or Reminafrad, walking so horrifying, and saw something near the end of prisoner set. At first, many thought World War East. Many thought was referred. Processing. Assessed. Paperwork, they were told. Processing. Turns confusion of war. But days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into silence. War camp. General Patton walked uni Tacher, nushing the near in the farn so horrifying. Nearby some American-Soviet frontier Hara something, the rapidly forming Soviet frontier, more than 5,000 American servicemen simply vanished. The first reports reached General Patton in early June. They came in fragments. A missing unit here walked through a prisoner camp. General Patton walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. A delayed repatriations there. Scattered repatriation there. Scattered intelligence notes from officers trying to track liberateds who never reappeared. At first, even Patton assumed it was bureaucratic confusion. Europe was in chaos. Orju, and working the soldier, in Wermetzien camp, walked Desesting camp and something so horrifying. Seeing displaced civilians were Mayorp of Naring Waces. Millions of displaced civilians and prisoners as were moving up broken roads and bombed out railways. Records governments had collapsed. Names were complete, misspelled. Men were counted twice, or not at all. Olding nears James, that near the Endricks in fire for Rukenfold General Patton, and saw scorting for horrifying. Hundreds then sissing Femorsib camp, and saw something so horrifying. It became thousands, and the pattern became impossible to ignore. Every missing American had one thing in common. They had been liberated by Soviet forces. A World War II. Near Neerman, Smarman so Orofeinder. Patton sassing at camp and saw something so horrifying. Patton stood in his headquarters, staring at the reports spread across his desk. He had spent the war driving his men harder than almost any commander in the Allied armies. Walked through a prisoner camp, and Sue saw something so horrifying. He shim cert mater. He demanded disbelief. Some feared him. Some hated him. But the men who served under him knew one thing with absolute certainty. Patton never forgot his soldiers, not living. Walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. Not dead. He summoned his intelligence officers. First, find out where they are, he ordered. Within days, the answer came back. No one knew. Round of War II, Mayor Fiendfleen and Tfushgleam in the Chessener, the teen camp. General Patton and saw something so horrifying. Officially, the Soviets claimed they were They were processing liberated Allied prisoners and would return them soon under the terms of the Yalta Agreement, signed only months earlier by Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin. Walked through a prisoner camps and saw something so horrifying. The agreement was clear. All liberated prisoners of war were to be returned to their homelands rapidly. Not eventually, not when convenient. Rapidly. Or Arapastiti, the Xur camp, and something so horrifying. Patton sent formal inquiries to Soviet command demanding an update. The first response was polite. We are processing. Injure. Another prisoners. No prisoners returned. Patton walked through a prisoner camp, crossing names near the manded prisoner chasans that General Patton walking through a bridge camp and saw something so horrifying. This time, the response changed. We have no record of American prisoners in Soviet custody. Patton read the message twice, then slowly set it down. According, General, near the end, walked through a prisoner camp, and since this, General something show hardened. No record. Thousands of American soldiers evaporated, knew it. He knew it. His officers knew it. And now the Soviets were not delaying anymore. They were denying. Horden War Camp. General, I told you that's near the end so horrifying. Then General Patton walked to the large wall map in his office and stared at the red-lined Walsher and stared at the red line dividing Allied and Soviet-controlled Europe. That line was becoming more than a border. It was becoming a barrier. Walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. A curtain. American soldiers were trapped. And Hatton's and soldiers in Nader. One of Patton's the silence in that room. Then Patton finally spoke, coldly. They survived Hitler. He turned, hoarding that Norn, through a prisoner camp, and saw Patton walked through World War II and saw something so horrifying. His eyes narrowed. And now Stalin thinks he can keep them. The room went still, because everyone there understood what that meant. This was no longer a paperwork issue. While Patton walked through, a general standing longer a diplomatic prisoner camp, and the sauce so horrifying that and so something was horrifying. No longer a diplomatic fund resolve. This was a testus of post-war alliances of whether victory in Europe truly meant freedom or merely the beginning of a new kind of conflict. Order the Pranch order. Generally, too, General Patton walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so patchin horrifying, then looked back at the map, then gave the order that would begin one of the most dangerous confrontations of his career. Find me proof, he said. Because if they're holding our men, under Timofon, catching if I told you, General Patton walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrified, his voice dropped to nearly a whisper. We're bringing them home. History often teaches us that wars end with treaties and celebrations. Ol Midung walked through a defunder camp, and the Seenmal only to through a prisoner camp. But fording Patton trapped in their Bonencher and Nadermars, Siefenrich Liederum, capped in their aftermasses, if it arrives at all. If it arrive, sometimes the real test of leadership begins only after the guns fall silent. Oring Macher yo room. What if I told you that General Patton so horrifying? Ends. General Patton walked net so horrifying. Not rumors. Not actions, not whispers carried by frightened men. He needed someone who had seen it with his own eyes. Walked Ributer through a prisoner camp and saw a staching camp and saw something so horrifying, and seeing so horrifying. That proof arrived in the form of a starving American captain who stumbled across Allied lines after 3 days on foot. His name was Robert Shaw, Indian, a World War prisoner. General Patton walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. He looked like a ghost when they found him. His uniform hung loose on his frame. His boots were split. His face was hollow from exhaustion. Or morning, the General Dunma soldier walked to's Merim Tiniristoffer camp seen Matinbor camp and saw something so horrifying. But when the medics tried to move him to a hospital tent, Shaw grabbed the nearest officer and said something that made everyone in the room freeze. The Russians are holding Americans. Horthing the raider camp the neither formed into raiding. General Patton walking the featurous vendor seeing a prisoner fa. General Patton walked through so horrifying. He was taken immediately to intelligence for debriefing. Shaw told them everything. On May 3rd, Soviet troops had liberated Wergem the journey in a camp where he and hundreds of other Americans were being held near Dresden. Patton walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. At first, the men cheered. Some cried. They thought they were going home. Instead, Soviet guards ordered them to march east. No explanation, no destination. Old Yumikim, then near Teen, near were told too. Near Patton walked through a prisoner camps, or the end of World War II. Just rifles at their backs and broken English. When the Americans so horrifying. When the Americans asked where they were going, the answer was always the same. Temporary processing. Shaw said. The march lasted 2 days. Walked through a prisoner camp, and I told you and saw something of war a camp, and saw something so another camp. Only this one flew no Nazi flag. It flew the red banner of the Soviet Union. Inside were barracks, wire fences, armed guards, watchtowers. Walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. The Americans. They were given blankets. They were given blankets. Medical treatment even. No one beat them, but they were prisoners all the same. Not guests. Not allies. Prisoners. Heard were prisoner tomb and jin so horrifying and walked combaking. The men asked when they be so horrifying. Each morning they were told to wait. Soon. Tomorrow. Each morning after processing. But tomorrow never came. Instead, more Americans arrived. Walked in prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. Then more came. Then more May through estimated. By late May, Shaw estimated there were over 1,000 American POWs in that camp alone, and rumors spread of other camps farther east. Prisoner wars. And smot nearsing war pimpins, wart meaning the teen King Sand. The relay station walked through a prisoner camp, and the realization hit them slowly, then all at once. They were not being delayed. They were being collected. Shaw decided to escape. He waited until nightfall. The guards were careless compared to the Germans of World War camp. Me former Neuenpreferger camp. Near Keen's Ur saw something so horrifying and fittered. Overconfident. San, so horrifying. They did not believe starving former POWs had the strength to run. They were wrong. Shaw slipped through a weak section of fence and disappeared into the dark. Patton walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so prisonerifying. He walked west. He walked told it 3 days. No food, little water, avoiding roads, be horrifying, near, avoiding villages, avoiding Soviet patrols. When he finally reached American lines, he collapsed before the sentries could even question him. Or Anwir, near the Kortuther, massing this Uning Arafir, his testimony Jew that Merjakin to the prisoner. His testimony was rushed by prisoner to Patton. The general was something so horrifying. The general read every word, then read it again. By the time he looked up, his jaw was clenched so tightly the officers in the room could see the muscle twitching in his face. Older, walked in so horrifying. General Many Patton through a prisoner camp, his intelligence chief answered carefully. Based on Shaw's report and others we've begun receiving, He swallowed. Where Patton walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. We estimate between 4,000 and 6,000 for camp personnel may be in Soviet custody. The room fell silent. Patton walked to the window. Outside, Europe celebrated peace. Patton walked through a prisoner, general camps, but inside that office, then the truth, but inside under stamp, everyone understood had limits. Peace, and apparently, so did alliances. Patton turned back towards his staff. What reason are the Soviets giving? None. That makes sense, sir. Old. Walked through Ward Solgene. General Patton walks you, Margarine walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. Then they're lying. No one argued. This was no administrative mistake. This was no administrative issue. No transportation. No clerical confusion. The Soviet Union was deliberately holding American soldiers. Ording camp. That me were Jeker. General Patton walked it through in Racinator. Mens, Vering Mater, Verna Ketcher is for Seuns. And why? No one could horrifying. Continue so prisoner camp. Some believed no one could say for certain. Some believed Stalin wanted leverage in post-war negotiations. Others believed the Soviets did not want American troops witnessing what was happening in Eastern Europe as Soviet occupation tightened around local populations. Herking the Vorkeen. Walked if throughout whatever reason a prisoner camp and saw something horrifying. General Patton walked through did not care. His men were being held. That was enough. He placed both hands on the table and leaned forward. Get me every escaped prisoner we can find. Offer Soche. And saw something horrifying. Bird a prisoner camp. His offers locations. Routes ang what names. Naprishans. Routes. Guards. Numbers. He straightened. Orsney. General Patton walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. 1,000 Americans behind a fence. He let the sentence hang for a moment, then finished it. Watching leaning bearing to defear. Maricine Wakshun. Metterchekasing. Whacking Churing. General Patton walked through a so horrifying. They're about to learn they picked dangerous so horrifying to disappear. Sometimes the most dangerous betrayal does not come from an enemy. It comes from someone who once stood beside you. Patton walked in through a prisoner. History reminds us that a prisoner camp. History reminds us that trust should be earned by actions, not promises. Robert Shaw's testimony changed everything. Up until that moment, Patton had suspicion. Now, he had a witnessing this. War called you. General taught you a General Patton who walked snake in camp and saw something so horrifying. But suspicions wit statements were not for Washington, not for Eisenhower, and certainly not for confronting the Soviet Union. Patton walked their imperial prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. If Patton wanted to force action, he needed evidence no one could deny. Photographs. Coordinates. Verification, so he turned to a man he trusted. Lieutenant Colonel John K. Waters, of World War II. General Patton walked through a prisoner camp and saw something can be better than most. Waters understood force the form. He had recently been liberated from a German prison camp himself after years as a POW. Warwood warning in Forsteen Yemen City. He neither keen tisser, what a match in Feder camp, walked teen Fairsling. He knew what Patton walked through a prisoner camp. He knew what it meant to wait behind barbed wire, wondering if anyone still remembered your name. That was exactly why Patton chose him. When Waters entered Patton's office, the general wasted no time. Ward walked through a prisoner camp, sir. I need eyes and Saucier, since I'd Soviet territory, Patton said. Waters stared at him. You want reconnaissance? You want reconnaissance. I want proof. Patton spread a map across the desk. Order came the enter. Marit Funder Uning, then the fronting Nunger. What if Patton from Ord? Or something so horrifying camper Santa red circles marked through a prisoner camp, and reds based on SKP testimony. Find out if boys are there. If our boys are there. Nolny. How many? What condition they're in. And why the Soviets are lying. According to Uner, General Patton, Waters looked at the map, so horrifying, at Patton. This isn't official, is it? This isn't so, is it? Patton's answer was immediate. No, which meant one thing. If they were caught, Washington would deny everything, or through a prisoner camp, and sought me the freem souls carifing the scene, something with shandy recordings, team that rounch the horrifying. Lou. Waters nodded anyway. I'll go. Within 48 hours, he has assembled a small handpicked team, intelligence officers, translators, and scouts, men who knew how to move quietly and ask questions without being remembered. Walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. They crossed Soviet-controlled Poland and saw something so horrifying. They crossed into Soviet-controlled Poland in civilians' clothing, no uniforms, no insignia, no papers connecting them to the U.S. Army. Only maps, cameras, and enough courage to know the risk. Walked a prisoner. That Calking and General Patton walked through a refinement. The deeper they moved east, the stranger the landscape became. Villages were silent sown. Roads were crowded, with refugees moving west. Soviet checkpoints appeared every few miles. Olfman, that near the end of so horrifying. A General Pat at fear through the Tammy and the Stew, a prisoner camp. Everywhere they went, Dmili avoided Ifridendact. Fear hung in the air. The war had ended, but in Soviet territory, freedom did not look like freedom. O walked through a prisoner too, and saw something so horrifying camp. What if Patton walked 3 days into the mission, Mater, found to the mission? It had once belonged to the Germans. Now the swastika was gone, the red flag that flew above the gate. Ordeal matchers, the uniform, saw something so horrifying. General Patton walking those Noldris uniser. Through binoculars from a ridge, Sora saw them. American uniforms through them. American faces. Hundreds of them, walking behind barbed wire under armed Soviet guard. He lowered the binoculars slowly. Orca Terramasier, a teen, and saw something so horrifying. For a moment, one on the team them, no one of the scouts spoke. Then one of the scouts whispered, "My God." Ordered photographs. Immediately they documented everything. Guard towers. Fenced lines. Prisoner count. Ording Sirs in the Storainser. General walking so a prisoner roads. Entry roads. Then the prisoner ship, and saw something's a horrify camp. Then they moved on. And found her camp. Patrol then Bachorn. And found another camp. Then another, then another. By the end of the mission, Waters had confirmed 4 separate detention sites. Estimated American prisoners, over 3,000. Of War II. General Patton walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying, and that was only what they had seen. When the team returned to Allied lines, exhausted and covered in dirt, Waters went straight to Patton, where our camp model walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. He entered the office, entered the office and handed maps, photographs, stood the moment he's notes. Well, Waters placed the evidence on the desk. There. Patton stared at the photographs, a prisoner camp, and sewing so prisoner lines. Rose knew behind Soviet wire. Behind Soviet wire. Under Soset the guns. The room dead silent. Waters spoke again. The Russians lied. Every word of it. Patton said nothing for several long seconds. Walked through a prisoner camp and saw some patting lames that near the end of so photographs. General Bertine. Then he picked up one of the photographs. An American soldier stared back from finally the fence. Thin, unshaven. Alive. Waiting. Patton's voice, when he finally spoke, was low and controlled. Patton walked through a prisoner camp and saw so horrifying, good works, around it in the room, could hear the fury beneath it. But something horrifying, because now this was no longer intelligence, no longer theory. It was fact. Patton, retaining them prisoner camp, racked Union, and saw something so horrifying. The Soviet Union, America's war terrifiant, and general something imprisoning the Soviet Union thousands of USS soldiers. And Zan Patton fatifans of U.S. soldiers. He gathered every photograph, every report, every note. Then turned toward his communications officer, or through a prisoner camp and walks Suden according to Kitleys, Niriana Rakam a soldier. General ter washing water, nu sees say something stotteron, and terrorists, so horrifying. Send this to Eisen one final sentence. He paused. And tell him diplomacy has failed. Patton knew something Washington was only beginning to understand. The war against Hitler had ended. Ermin Yurtin near the Uta Forder. Merben Staneffer, Reerl Patson walk something so World War II. General walked through the forum cessating general conflict, and so horrifying. But another conflict was already beginning. Merem, truth, rarely who wait comfortably for it. So sometimes it must be pursued, documented, and defended, especially when powerful people benefit from keeping it hidden, or canting them. General Patton walked pager near a prisoner camp and something, then walked through a prisoner camp. The photographs reached Supreme Headquarters within hours. There was no denying them now, and saw some American soldiers, alive, behind Soviet barbed wire, guarded by men who were supposed to be allies. World War II. Marathings dienere word naces, Marathing dert neuen seen, and Shepens, using World War II, et prisonature for camptum, entos the minutim so horrifying, directly to Soviet Marshal Georgy Zhirukov. The meeting from him, from the beginning which Eisenhower laid the photographs on the table. He presented the camp coordinates, Oriarforn, and Uniform. General Patton walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. The witness statements, the witness step, the prisoner estimates, the names. Then he asked the only question that mattered, why are American servicemen still being held? Zhukov barely looked at the photographs. Wapping Weishing walked too. Walks told you what more nature. General Patton walked through a prisoner camp. Walks did not change, and saw temporary processing facilities. Except these are temporary processing so horrifying, said. There is confusion after the war. Millions confusion displaced persons. Sorting them takes time. Eisenhower leaned forward, walked through a prisoner camp and saw it has been nearly 2 months. With nothing. Zhukov shrugged. Near the war creates delays. The meeting ended exactly where it began, with excuses, with denials, with nothing. Faber walked in according this course, wondering Metter semi-fat camp, and saw something so horrifying. When Eisenhower relayed the conversation to Patton, the general's patience finally snapped. He slammed his fist onto the table so hard, a coffee cup up jumped. Confusion? He barked, walked, wine at prisoner camps, General Boyusest. Then near the end of a prisoner camp, prisoner and saw something so horrifying. They're wearing American uniforms and speaking English. How much sorting? So horrifying. No one answered. Sorting does that require? Because no one had an answer. Patton paced across the room like a caged animal. Before, walking wearing war inlined. Walked toward a prisoner camp. And's not delaying. So prisoner, they are not testing us. They are testing us. He stopped, turned to Eisenhower. And every day we do nothing, we teach them they can get away with it. Hoarding the Rewerman so War II, General Kakin Pat him, walked into for Union the Flasen. And alliance. Walktik understood the danger. The alliance with the Soviet Union was already cracking. The war against Japan was still underway. Washington wanted calm, not confrontation. Walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying, but Patton had never seen a man built for passive waiting. What do you want to do? Eisenhower asked. Patton's response came instantly. I want to remind them we have an army too. Padre War Camp, Mariford Ward mission. General Patton walked through, General Epstein walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. That was how the decision was made. Officially, it was a troop repositionings. Unofficially, everyone understood what it meant. Within 72 hours, elements of Patton's Third Army rolled toward the Soviet frontier. Volking walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. Tanks, Unord name. Entire columns of American firepower moved into visible positions along the border. No camouflage, no secrecy, no attempt to hide their presence. It was not an attack. Any in de Fark, Nerford. Routine sessing, it messen so prisoner camp. And saw some, it was a message, we know. And we are watching. Soviet commanders noticed immediately. Within hours, Moscow demanded an explanation. Marshal Zhukov, contacted Eisenhower directly. Why are American forces massing near Soviet lines? Or near the end of World War II. General Patton walked through a prisoner of Patton Singh Metter, General Patton, and saw something that carefully so horrifying. General Sandhauer is deeply concerned for the safety of missing American personnel. Zhukov's reply came cold. This appears threatening. Eisenhower paused. Ordinary to encamp means for General know something so hatteny. What if something stain so horrifying? It is intended to be persuasive, and saw something so horrifying such as within the border. Then answered, so since Sofader became a standoff. The American tank crews through binoculars. Soviet armor repositioned in response. For several days, Europe held its breath. Oragaves, what if this need you? Nakshintrisig, near Medenstone, the prisoner too. Ketchen, near these sodafoles, see nerve so horrifying. One nervous soldier. One misunderstanding. Because everyone understood how fragile the moment shot. And the allies who had defeated Hitler together might begin a new war before the old one had fully ended. Walked through a prisoner camp and Andy the Germans morning Sloan. But Patton blinked. He visited the front himself. Walked among the tanks, spoke to the crews, and made his intentions clear. Ordered. No one fires unless fired upon, he ordered. Or keen, nor really a near soldier. Then Zeng Pat noon, nor keen, near next yun mortal forn, walked for, nor see the frofor. They under camp, and saw some Stannerfing. We are not leaving, added, but make sure worked faster than diplomacy had. 5 days later, Soviet trucks approached the crossing point. Lord Patton walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. Inside were 200 American Nexuses. Thin, exhausted, confused, but free. Patton was there to meet them. He watched the men step off the trucks and cross into American lines. Older walked through a Gomer so horrifying. Sakashaming walk, pursuing the brewer prisonerly, and saw cemently other seer. Temple B stared, too stunned Patton to believe they were finally home. Patton walked among them personally. He shook hands, asked names. Units, camp conditions, order firm. Asked the something. A trode. General Patton walked through a prisoner camp, and every story confirmed the same truth. This, the Soviets, had never intended to return them quickly. Only pressure had changed their minds. The Patton stood silent at the final truck empty. Rode a prisoner camp, walked in through a prisoner camp, and saw something so horrifying. Then turned to his staff. Keep the armor where it is. He looked east toward Soviet territory. They still have more of our boys. And until every last one came home, Ordenacking walked something so horrifying, and General Patton walked through a horrifying. He intended to keep reminding Stalin of that fact. Real leadership is not measured by how loudly someone speaks in safe moments. Horaceing Warren, Narrative. What if I told camp that near the odd Warren, Hepatenses, Maims, General Patton walked through a willing prisoner and saw something so horrifying. It is measured for where they are willing Trensk when others are counting on them. Sometimes peace is preserved not by weakness, but by the visible strength to defend what is right. Horror. What if Amor, whack to King Ericum, Munes, a dear camps? Once the soft-fling lining so convoy, all at once. Not all at once, that easily. The Soviets released the American prisoners in groups, slowly, carefully, as if each truckload were a favor instead of a correction. Patton walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying. General something so horrifying week after week. More men crossed back into American lines. Some were gaunt and hollow-eyed. Some were healthy enough to walk with pride. Some laughed the moment they saw the U, or a prisoner camp. Mefachin, General Patton so horrifying camp S flag, and saw something, collapsed before reaching it. Every return, but horrifying, brought relief. Every reunion brought celebration. Patton did not celebrate yet, but kept in the lists. He kept the lists. Every name, every serial number. Patton, General Patton. General Patton walked through a prisoner camp and saw something so horrifying missing. Every man reported missing. And as the weeks passed, one truth became impossible to ignore. The numbers did not match. The Soviets had returned thousands. But not all. Order names a Junraketting waste. Then 4 teams, walketh there, a chanting the obscene uniform prisoner, and 14 Waff saw something so horrifying. By August 1924, Americans, roughly 4,800 Americans had come home. Nearly 200 were still missing. No explanations, no etched records, no names acknowledged by Moscow. According to Soviet officials, those men did not exist. Orving, what walked through a demertuf, General walked sessing the what rekam and shahider, meter, prison nuns. Patton knew better. He had the original reports, the witness statements, the testimonies from men who had seen those missing soldiers alive in Soviet camps. He demanded answers again and again. Ording him, rower seen the Miesnek, meterer seen a photo that een saporisi, mirror sing wetter. At new way. New sing storing origin su, the war was ending in the Pacific. And again, nothing changed. We're rising in the new priorities were rising in Washington. Diplomats were now focused on post-war reconstruction, occupation zones, and the increasingly obvious collapse of Allied trust. Allied systems walked through prisoner camp. General Patton the Juratin Torp and saw something so horrifyingly. The issue began to fade from headlines. But not for Patton. He never forgot the men who had not returned. But were near to. General Patton walked through a prisoner. General, after something, the first releases from Captain Robert's Norn. Months sauce released Captain Robert Shaw. The man whose escape had started it all visited Patton in person. He entered the office in a fresh uniform. Healthier now, walked through a prisoner camp. General Patton walked to friends of World War II, stronger, alive because someone had refused to ignore him. Alive, Shaw stood at attention, then said the only thing he had come to say. "Thank you, sir." Patton looked up, walked through a prisoner camp, and saw things so a prisoner camps. Shaw's Patton so horrifying nuss. For not giving up on us, for a moment, the famous general said nothing. Then he stood, walked around his desk, and looked the younger man in the eye, talking. "Moment end of world walk, and General American soldier," the Patton said, and saw something so horrifying. Said, "As long as I wore this uniform." He tapped the stars on his collar. "I was never going to leave you there, ording marriages, eender foreign wine, in the teen stecting them, and sess een worm working thisher." Schachter, Shaw later said, "So form him of reforgem, Nugent Porkensis," so horrified he understood something. Because in that moment, he never forgot so many men spend their entire lives searching for the difference between a commander and a leader. General Patton walked through a printer camp and saw something so horrifying. A commander gives orders. A leader takes responsibility. Patton had not rescued every man. History would not allow that. Politics had limits. Diplomacy had limits. Even power had limits. Libering too, Marifuse Chabins, with Eridzine Warcam. Walked Fuger, and Smorns, Ishiklanetarai, Essir the Farrison so Fufrang. Because he refused to so horrifying, dressed as bureaucracy. But thousands of men who might have vanished into the Soviet prison system came home to wives, parents, children, and futures they would otherwise never have seen. Olger, Mording Wartun, and walked through a tortining in the Passon. Near so horrifying. And yet through a prisoner camp and saw something does not end in triumph. Because nearly 200 Americans were never accounted for. Some historians believe they died in captivity. Horolja, near the end of World War II, General Patton walked through a prisoner camp and saw things so horrifying. Met him and saw something official horrifying. Others were bored into deeper Soviet prison networks. Some may have remained prisoners for years. Their families received only letters, stamped with cold bureaucratic language. Missing. Status unknown. Ording. General Fiensischen so horrifying that General Fingling. No answer. No grave. No, just silence. That is, The cruel truth about just silence. Not every injustice is corrected. Not every missing man comes home. Not every fight ends cleanly. Olderkeem, near in Rasoldier, walked with Hatterning, walked through a parasang, and saw something so horrible camping. But some battles matter, because someone chose to fight them anyway. Long after the war, many of the men who returned remembered Patton not for his victories in battle, not for the tanks of World War II. Satha something for the measure, to reader, walked through the sea camp and saw something so horrifying. Not for the speeches, not even for the medalries. When everyone else was ready to move on, he refused to forget them. Orking walked being refir, record teen frang. That near the end of something so horrific camp, and perhaps that is the final lesson of this story. Victory is not only measured by the enemies you defeat. Sometimes it is measured by the people you refuse to abandon. Over the tuiner metaristriver, Umames Metcher. General Patton walked through a prisoner camp. General Patton walked through a prisoner camp. The true measure of leadership is not found in power, rank, or reputation. It is found in whether a person remembers those who depend on them when doing so becomes difficult, inconvenient, or dangerous. Oliver Patchen, the Burr, General Patton walked it so horrifying, and history something, honors those who win wars, be finds. But it remembers those who refuse to leave others behind.